We acknowledge that the place in which we work and study is situated within the unceded lands of the Kanekahaga Mohawks people, part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. There's also a strong historic presence of Anishinaabe people in what is now known as the Greater Montreal area. Tiohtià:ke, or Montreal, has also long been and continues to be a gathering place for many First Peoples from all directions. We honor and thank the traditional custodians of this land and strive to work for the success of future generations. Furthermore, we cannot have an acknowledgement without a commitment to action at Vanier College. We are striving to remain engaged in the process of conciliation by incorporating all principles of the Indigenous Educational Protocol in our current strategic plan. We continue to work for the success of future generations of students from all backgrounds. For those of you that are on Zoom, so we have a lovely crowd here, lovely to see everybody. We're also streaming this on Zoom. So if anyone in Zoom land is new to Zoom, which I would be surprised, if you are joining us that way, please note that you may change your viewing preference for the screen by clicking on View in the top right-hand corner of the Zoom window, which will enable you to select either a full gallery view or an individual speaker view. Also, if you wish to ask any questions during or after the presentation, if there's time to respond to them, please type them into the Q&A box, which you may access by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the Zoom window. Verbal access and the chat functions have been disabled for audience members during this webinar. So Mona Greenbaum, welcome. Mona is the co-founder and executive director of the LGBT+ Family Coalition, an association that advocates for families with lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans parents. In 2010, Mona received the Médaille de l'Assemblée nationale du Québec in honor of her many years of activism within the LGBT community. In 2015, on the 40th anniversary of the Charter, the Quebec Commission on Human Rights and Youth Rights selected Mona as one of the 40 people having led exceptional careers in the defense or advocacy of the rights included in the Charter. In 2017, Mona was one of 7 Canadians honored by the Canadian Human Rights Museum. Mona also works as a consultant and trainer for Quebec's Institut National de Santé Publique. Thank you for being here, and take it away.
Feels so good to get that mask off. Just going to adjust that. You hear me okay? Yeah, okay, great. Well, thanks so much for being here, and I'm happy that it's not an empty audience. I'm going to talk to you for about, I think, 50 minutes, probably not much more than that, about LGBT families, obviously, a bit about my organization that's a not-for-profit organization that's been around for many years, and the evolution of rights for LGBT families in Quebec. So I'm going to try to finish like a little bit early so that you can ask questions, we can exchange a bit, and if at any point Leila or you want to, Colleen, sorry, I got the old age mental block. If you want to interject with questions in the middle as well, feel free to intervene. So, okay, let me just get my clicker going. All right. So the LGBT Family Coalition, it's a bilingual organization that was founded in 1998. So we're almost 25 years old. It's a group for lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, two-spirit parents and future parents as well. And of course, also for our kids. Nowadays, we have about 1,800 families that are members across the province. And really, we do we have 3 big sectors that we work on. First of all, we're designated as a legal advocacy group. So we fight for the rights, the legal and social recognition of LGBT families. Things like, well, you'll see in the presentation, but we were very much behind the advancements of rights for gay and lesbian headed families. We've worked a lot on trans rights as well. We also provide services for our members. So we do all sorts of activities, conferences, discussion groups, workshops, family activities like cabana souk and picnics and stuff like that. And the third large sector of what we do, and this is probably, I would say, about 70% of our work, is that we have a team of about a dozen trainers that travel throughout the province of Quebec, teaching professionals about sexual and gender diversity. So since we started doing that, not just testimonies, but actual professional workshops in 2009. And we've done about 1,500 over the past years, training more than 50,000 professionals. And that's like everything from social workers, teachers, psychologists, policemen or policewomen, police people, judges, anybody who works with families or with youth. So I wanted to talk to you first about our name. So when the group started, we were the Lesbian Mothers Association back in 1998, because at that time, the reality of gay men starting families, it really in Quebec was really not there. Of course, there was always gay men that had children in a heterosexual context, but the gay men that were actually starting their families in a gay relationship or with a gay identity didn't exist in the 90s in Quebec. So we had that name for a while. And then towards the mid 2000s, we started to meet more and more either gay fathers or future fathers that were gay. And so we decided to become a mixed group, and we changed our name to the Coalition des Familles Homoparentales. So the Homoparental Family Coalition. And that name worked for a while, except that we also, well, in LGBT, there's the B. So we have bisexual parents who are not necessarily in a homoparental family. And as well, we have trans and non-binary parents who are in relationships that wouldn't be qualified as being same gender. So we decided to change our name again, and we call ourselves the Coalition des Familles LGBT+. Hopefully the plus will cover new demographics that happen over the upcoming years, at least for a while. So that name change happened in 2014. So I'm going to start just to talk to you a little bit about a few myths in terms of the quantification of families. So the first one would be that families with same gender parents exist, but there's very few of them. So that's one thing that we can look at. And the other is that trans people can't have kids because they're infertile or they're sterile. So the research talks about how there's been a number of different studies looking at how many of these families exist. In Quebec, there's been a few about families with gay and lesbian parents, and they kind of all go in the same direction. The most recent one is telling us that there's around somewhere between 30 and 50,000 kids living in families with gay and lesbian parents. So that number has been slowly going up over the years. For families with trans parents, it's a bit harder to get a precise number because, I mean, even in general, when we're talking about LGBT people, it's very hard to know exactly like how many LGBT people there are in any population. It depends on who's asking the question. People are not necessarily going to talk about their sexual orientation or gender identity. It depends on how the question is asked. There's a number of different factors. And when you add in family into that, it's even more complicated. So for trans-headed families, there's been 5 big studies in Ontario, in the US, and in Europe that have shown that anywhere between 27 to 44%, depending on the study, of trans people are also parents. So it's a really huge percentage of trans people that have kids. It's surprising because in the gay and lesbian community, it's a lot less. Probably about 20% of lesbians have kids, and maybe 5% of gay men have kids. But for trans people, a lot of them have kids, and I don't know why, but it's an interesting phenomenon. So this has been confirmed with a research project that was carried out at UQAM. It's called SAVI LGBTQ. And of the LGBT parents that were participated in the study, 17% of them were trans parents. So it's interesting, it's much more than you would expect in terms of proportions. And so that gives us the idea that there's somewhere between 8,000 to 10,000 kids that live in families with trans parents. So these families do exist. And I would say that nowadays it's very rare that you'll come across a person who says, I've never met a family with a lesbian or gay or a trans parent at all. So they're more and more common in our society. So how do we start our families? I guess one of the most common ways still is if you're talking about previous heterosexual relationships. So, you know, a gay or a lesbian parent who has kids in a heterosexual context and then comes out after the kids were born, or a trans person who has kids before transitioning. So when you look at the kind of the big pie of LGBT families, that piece of the pie, the previous heterosexual or before transitioning, is still a pretty big piece of the pie. Sexual relationships, I put that in there because we're talking again about bisexual parents. So a bisexual parent could be in a relationship with someone of another gender, or also trans parents that if they haven't had bottom surgery, they can still have kids through, some of them can still have kids through sexual relationships. So that's another option. There's international adoption, which I'll just speak about really briefly in this talk because it's pretty limited for us as LGBT people because the countries that have kids that are adoptable, well, first of all, Quebec only deals with a fixed number of countries, about 30 countries with adoptable children. And of all those 30 countries, only one of them, Guatemala, yes, it's Guatemala or Colombia? No, it's Colombia, sorry. Colombia is the only country that that allows LGBT people to apply to become adoptive parents. All the other ones have laws against it. So it's not very common. What is a lot more common in Quebec is adoption of children that were born in Quebec or who are residing in Quebec through youth protection services. There's also adoption by special consent. So that's adoption, I would say by step parents, that's the easiest way to explain it. So if a child only has one legally recognized parent and a new person becomes involved with that legal parent as, sorry, and plays the role of a step parent. So eventually that second parent could adopt. There's fostering. There's fertility clinics, so we have access to fertility clinics. There's home inseminations, so with a known sperm donor. And I wrote on the slide, insémination artisanale ou amicale. So these are words, artisanal or amicable, I guess you would translate it in English. Inseminations, funny terminology, but it's actually words that are used in the civil code to make the distinction between inseminations. Artisanal inseminations are basically when you have a known sperm donor who will donate his sperm in a little container, versus amicable insemination where there's actually a sexual relationship between the donor. Is that me? No. Sexual relationship between the donor and the person who wants to be pregnant, although that the donor is not going to play the role of a parent. So that's called amicable insemination. So two different types of home inseminations. There's surrogacy, you know what that is. And just maybe to distinguish, we don't, in my organization, we don't use the term surrogate mother because for us, the word mother has a real charge to it. It's a parent. And those surrogates, as well as the intended parents, don't see the surrogate as being a parental figure. So we just use the word surrogate. And there's co-parenting also. So that's another way. What it is basically is starting a family with someone who you're not in a love or a sexual relationship with. You're not in a conjugal relationship with that person. It's just a friend or somebody that you decide to parent with. So the classic example is like a couple of lesbians and a couple of gay men that decide to start a family together, or it could just be two good friends. So that's, and I think you have a talk coming up right after me or around 4 o'clock with someone who is doing co-parenting. So that's another way for us to start families. So now I want to talk to you about the little history of our group and the advancement of rights of LGBTQ2+ families in Quebec, because they're kind of intertwined. I'm just going to take some water. I'm having an afternoon dry throat syndrome. Better. Okay. So this is a little newspaper clipping that I pulled out for this talk. It's one of the that's me, by the way, in case you're not recognizing me, my partner and our kid. It's one of many articles that were done about our families over the years. I have to say that from the time we started the group, and we started the group when our first kid was 6 weeks old, there's always been a media interest in our families. It's always like I've literally done well over 1,000 interviews over the years. And there continues to be a media interest. It's like was always very surprising to me that the media keeps wanting to know more and more about our families. This is another photo that I pulled out. It's a very early Pride Parade photo with our tie-dye banner that we made in somebody's backyard. The reason I wanted to show it to you is because just to show you how our group, which has really grown over the years, we're 17 employees now, and it started really kind of grassrootsy and, really on the kitchen table and in our backyards and meeting in cafes and stuff. So that was our origins. And unfortunately, I didn't save the banner because I really love it. I wish I had, but threw it out. This is me and my partner, Colleen. I don't know. Oh, there you are. Yeah. Colleen and I know each other since many years. So this is probably the more recognizable Mona Nicole. We look very different now. So an early community day at Pride in Montreal, 2001. So the group had been around just a couple of years at that point. So where were we in the 1990s when the group first began? First of all, complete invisibility. Even the word, there wasn't even a word for our type of family. Like in French, we say famille homoparentale. That word didn't exist even. That's how invisible we were when the group was formed. It occurred in the lexicon about a year later. And we were, I would say, completely unknown in the public sphere. I think if you would have gone out and said to someone, did you know that gays and lesbians could have kids? They'd be surprised. I mean, obviously, physiologically, we can, but the existence of this type of family, people just didn't know about us, completely invisible. Also, we had no legal recognition, so none for our couples. This was before gay marriage and couple rights, none for us as parents. So when our two kids were born, I carried them, and I was, for the first few years, their only legal parent, even though my partner Nicole was very much involved in planning to have kids together, and there at every point through my pregnancy, the delivery. As a parent, she had no legal recognition. She wasn't on the birth certificate, which just said mother Mona, father unknown. And the other thing was that our kids really lacked rights because they were only allowed to have one legal parent. So if something would have happened to me, my kids would have been legally speaking orphans, and Nicole had no rights towards them or responsibilities either. So they were discriminated against in that way. And the other thing that was a problem for us from the outset was our lack of access to parenthood. So we couldn't adopt kids then. We didn't have access to fertility clinics, and forget surrogacy. So it was difficult for us to have kids in those days. Now it's, I think, a lot more obvious for people, even though it can still be quite challenging. But in those days, it was really challenging. When I got pregnant with our first kid, Nicole and I thought, oh, well, we should go see a lawyer just to make sure that, everything will be in place. And so I was, I guess, around 5-6 months, and we contacted a lawyer, and she was like, yeah, sure, no problem. We'll get this together. We'll get the papers together for you. And it was only on the second visit that she said, ooh, it might be more complicated than I thought. She said, this has never been done before in Quebec, and some of the people that I've spoken to have said it might not be that easy. So 5 years later, 4 lawyers, 3 levels of court. It was a long case. And the reason that I show this to you is because across Canada, no matter what type of LGBT rights you're talking about, whether it's rights in the workplace or education, couples, families, whatever, it's always individuals that are going in front of the courts and challenging the constitutionality of laws. And that's the thing that have made our rights advance in Quebec and elsewhere in Canada as well. So we have Charter of Rights at the provincial level in all the provinces, and a Canadian Charter of Rights as well. And we use those charters to challenge laws that we find discriminatory. So it's always been individuals or couples that have fought to advance the rights. And I think that our case, well, I know that our case was the case that pushed the government forward, because the Attorney General of Quebec was involved in our case to kind of maintain the civil code. They're always there when you challenge the civil code. The Attorney General is there to push back. The other couple that around the same time, our friends Michael Hendricks and Renee Leboeuf, maybe you've heard of them. They were the first couple to ask for the right to be married in Quebec. And they went to the courthouse in Old Montreal, tried to get a marriage license, were refused, and said, okay, we're going to court. And this article that was in Le Devoir came out in November 2001, was interesting because we found out there was a leak that had been made to Le Devoir, something that we weren't supposed to know about yet, that the government was working on a white paper on civil union. So civil union in those days was a type of marriage, because marriage is under jurisdiction between the federal government and the provincial government. So Quebec alone couldn't give us marriage. So they said, okay, we're going to give you civil union instead. It's like another type of marriage. And so we found out that the government was working on this law. And when we finally got access to what they call the avant-projet de loi, we saw that there was absolutely nothing in there for families. And usually when we're talking about marriage in the law, it includes all sorts of stipulations for families. But in this case, there's absolutely nothing. So we went to Quebec City and we met the Minister of Justice, and we said, we know that you think you're doing something that's really good for LGBT people. But in fact, if the law passes in its current form, the whole LGBT community is going to be up in arms against you, because this isn't marriage. There's a lot of missing elements. And we talked about families, and he said, well, the problem is that Quebec society, people are not, they're not in favor of families with same gender parents. They're not at ease with this. And he actually pulled out a statistic that showed that at that time, only about 10% of Quebecers were comfortable with the idea of LGBT families. And he said, and look, on TV, there aren't any programs, which is, we thought that was really interesting. But at the time, it's true, there was starting to be programs with gay people, but nothing with gay people that had kids. So he said, if you want us to change our slated legislation, you're going to have to sensitize the public. And so we started on, in a relatively short period of time, about 9 months, 10 months altogether. We did an incredible amount of interviews. I think just in that short period, about 150, not just Nicole and I, many families in our group. At that point, our group had about 400 families already. And I put this particular article in just because it shows you a bit how people were thinking about our families. It was like le contre et le pour, so for or against. We have kids, we're already a family, and they're saying for or against. So it was very it was a challenging time, because we felt like our families were a little bit under attack. And we did a lot of interviews. We tried to do as much sensitization as possible. And there were 2 parliamentary commissions. So what happens is that when there's a law that's proposed, a projet de loi, what happens is that often there's public consultations. So people are invited to come to Quebec City, to the National Assembly, and present briefs. And the picture that I put in here is one of, the guy on the bottom is Paul Bégin. So he was the Minister of Justice at the time. And the 3 young adults above him were 3 young people that grew up in families with gay and lesbian parents. And they talked about their experiences, how they felt in their families, the love that their parents gave them, the environment that they created for them, but also the stigmatization and discrimination that they had confronted. And their testimonies were so touching that there were actually politicians that were listening that had tears in their eyes. And I put this in because I really think that they were the ones that kind of turned the whole thing in the right direction for us. Their testimonies actually made the laws change. So there were 2 parliamentary commissions in February and May 2002. It's like 20 years ago, almost to the day. And this is the day of the vote. It was, I think, June and the date's not there. I think it was June the 9th, June the 8th or 9th, 2002. And these are pictures of our kids at the National Assembly. Kids are never allowed to participate in a vote at the National Assembly. It's just not, it's not something that happens. And we insisted that our kids be allowed to be there. So we had, I mean, it wasn't 400 families, obviously, but we were 5, 6 families that came with our children, like very young children, as you can see. And we watched as the, well, wait, I'm going to go to the next slide. Yeah, you can see we were up in the balconies of the Salon Bleu at the National Assembly, and we looked down at the deputies and ministers that were voting on the law. And we watched as they one after another, after another, after another, all voted in favor unanimously to accept this law that included rights for homoparental families. So it was a pretty big day for us. It was really incredible. It's kind of almost like the classic, you know, small group of people working together to make a big change, because it did affect a lot of families. So yeah, that law, yeah, it was adopted on the 7th of June. So that's us up in the National Assembly. So that was obviously a big historic moment for us 20 years ago. Same gender parents were recognized as the legal parents of their children. For lesbian couples, the legal link between the parent and the child, the filiation or filiation, is established through the birth certificate. So unlike other Canadian provinces, even like a province like Ontario, up until very recently, lesbian couples, the non-biological parent would have to go to court and adopt her partner's child to be legally recognized. We said, and we really literally created this on our kitchen table, we basically said, we don't want to have to go to court to adopt our own children. We want to do what heterosexual couples do. They just fill out the forms for the birth certificate and send them off to the government. And a few weeks later, the birth certificate comes back with their names on it. And it's that establishes the filiation. So we asked for that and they actually listened to us. So we never had to do co-parent adoption in Quebec. Same gender couples. So especially for gay men, this was important. They were then allowed to adopt conjointly. Because before, single gay men could adopt, pretty much being in the closet, but they could adopt kids through the youth protection. So as of 2002, they could adopt as couples, so gay men or lesbians who want to adopt as well. And all the connected laws were harmonized. So, you know, whether we're talking about parental leave or child support, insurance, whatever, all the laws were changed to make homoparental families really equal to heteroparental families. So that was a big one for us. The other big dossier for us, and I realized a while ago that no one, people know that we were involved in the civil union thing and the parental rights, but also the access to fertility clinics. So before 2002, we were completely barred access to clinics. If you would phone up and say, you know, I'm in a same-sex couple, or I'm a single woman, whether lesbian or heterosexual, you could not get an appointment. And I know because we tried. That was pretty much the first slap in the face that I ever received. Being an out lesbian in Quebec, I never really felt discriminated against at all, honestly, at work or in my family or in my neighborhood. But when I tried to make an appointment with a fertility clinic to start my family, I was refused access. But there was nothing in the civil code that said that we couldn't have access. It was just kind of internal policy decisions of fertility clinics. So after 2002, you know, with the fact that we, you know, 2 same gender parents could be recognized, theoretically, we should have had access, but we still didn't in many clinics. Well, what happened in general was we started to work on getting access in a way that kind of became our modus operandi for advocacy work. We, as often as possible, will work on 3 different levels. So the first level is institutional. So basically, we approach, in this case, the fertility clinics themselves to say, why don't you accept us? And we visited some of the biggest clinics to try to get access. We went with the FFQ, the Fédération des Femmes du Québec, the Quebec Women's Federation, and with a researcher from UQAM who was specialized in the research on homoparental families, showing that we have the same parental capacity as any other parents, our kids develop normally and all that. So we went to their ethics committees and basically said, why don't you give us access? So that was the institutional level. We also often work in front of the courts, as I had mentioned. So what happened in 2003 was that we lodged a complaint to the Quebec Human Rights Commission, and I'm going to tell you about that in a second. And then the third level that we work on is the legislative level. So we work with the government to try to get laws changed. And there was on the table a law at the federal level on assisted procreation. So we actually had a porte d'entrée, like an access point to trying to get lesbians and single women in general accepted into those clinics. So this is a news clipping from the federal law that we worked on. There was a law that they'd been talking about since the 90s, a big law that dealt with all sorts of things from surrogacy to stem cell research to fertility clinics. And so we were actually the only LGBT group across Canada that asked that the clinics were forced to, basically, because many didn't want to accept all people regardless of their sexual orientation or their marital status, because the clinics wouldn't say, we're not taking you because you're lesbian. They'd say, we're not taking you because you're not married, even though with heterosexual clients, they wouldn't check their marriage certificates. So we actually won that, and we got like a single line in a 100-page law that just basically said that clinics cannot refuse people on the basis of sexual orientation or conjugal status. So after that, all clinics across Canada were legally forced to accept us. So it's kind of a big thing. It was, a little kind of underground work. We went, I presented at the House of Commons, but at the same time, it's not like LGBT history is completely erased. We don't have our history. So it's kind of an interesting thing that happened. So we did get access that way. And the other thing when I'm talking about working in front of the courts, there was this couple in our group that in the time when we were being denied access, one of the women in the couple had phoned the clinic, and I think she didn't explicitly mention that she was in the same gender couple. She just made an appointment. And when the couple got to the clinic, the doctor, it was at the Royal Victoria Hospital, which doesn't exist anymore, but on the English side, the big hospital. The doctor actually said to them, we don't want lesbians Frenching in our waiting room. That's going to disturb our clients. So that, I think, was quite discriminatory. They thought so too. So we encouraged them to lodge a complaint to the Human Rights Commission. And they did, and they won $19,000. And the Royal Victoria Hospital was really shamed for discriminating against us. And it was actually publicized. I mean, we did TV stuff. I had friends in Vancouver that saw me on TV. So it was really like a wide public shaming. And the clinic was very not happy with us for the first few years. But I have to say that it did work, because nowadays that clinic, which is now the McGill Reproduction Center, is the most open and accepting clinic in Quebec. So they really changed, and this pushed them in the right direction. So what's the current context? So there's a growing diversity of different family forms, more and more types, more different ways to form our families. Like I mentioned, the law in 2002 for homoparental families, more access to assisted procreation, to adoption. We got same-sex marriage at the federal level in 2005. And in 2015, the recognition of transparental families before the courts, because before 2015, if a trans parent would be in a custody battle, against their ex in front of the courts, they would systematically lose custody of their kids, just like lesbians did in the 1980s. In the 80s, if it was found out that a mother was lesbian, she would just lose custody. It had nothing to do with her parental capacity or whatever, just the fact that she was lesbian. So that was finished for lesbians after the 80s, but for trans parents, it went on until 2015. And finally, in 2015, there was what we call a jurisprudential case, so a case that set the example that influenced other subsequent cases so that trans parents wouldn't be discriminated against. And I see a typo there. More recently, we have had some coverage with a bill that came out in 2021 for assisted procreation. So certain of the fees are supposed to be covered. There's a few little glitches with that law, but it's going forward. And in general, a much bigger acceptance of LGBTQ2+ families. So remember I said to you that in 2001, there was about 10% of Quebecers that were okay with our families. Now it's up to about 75%. So when you think about it, such a huge change from 10 to 75 in a 20-year period in terms of social recognition, it's humongous. It's really, really a big, big, big attitude change. So that's very positive. At the same time, when you think about 75%, it means that there's still 25% of people that are not at ease with our families. So there's still some work to do. What's missing nowadays in terms of the Quebec context? First of all, surrogacy is more and more socially acceptable, but there's no legal framework for surrogacy in Quebec. So it's not illegal, it's legal, but there's no laws that protect the whole process. So if you do a contract with a surrogate, the contract has no legal validity in Quebec. So, and that's unlike all the other Canadian provinces that have common law. For us here in Quebec with the civil code, surrogacy isn't recognized. So that makes things complicated for people who want to start their families through surrogacy. As I mentioned, we don't have access very much to international adoption other than Colombia. And multi-parent families are not recognized here in Quebec. So there are families that exist in our group and outside of our group that have more than 2 parents. So sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 4. And in Quebec, we only have legal recognition of 2 parents maximum. And there's another thing, the parental roles, mother or father on birth certificates don't match with the identities of trans parents. And I'm going to, I know that probably doesn't make any sense to you, but I'll show you a picture. So this person gave me permission to use the birth certificate of one of their kids. This is Marie-Ève Baron, who's a trans woman. She used to have a masculine name. She legally transitioned, so her children's birth certificates had to have that name change as well. But the government was refusing, and it's still very iffy, refusing to put a matching parental role. So if you see a birth certificate that says Marie-Ève, that's a very gendered feminine name. With Père, you right away know that this person is trans. So much for their privacy rights and the rights of their children also. So that needs to be fixed. Right now, it's kind of fixed on the administrative level, but it needs to be fixed in terms of the laws so that that fix will stay there. So fortunately, there's been a case, and maybe you've heard about this because there was a lot in the news in the past few months. There was a court case that was put forward by Concordia's Center for Gender Advocacy. It was actually deposed in 2015 in front of the Superior Court, so quite a while back, but these things go very slowly. And the intention of the Gender Advocacy Center was to show that there was a number of articles in the Civil Code that were unconstitutional, that discriminated against trans and non-binary people. So whether trans immigrants and refugees, non-binary people in general, intersex people, trans youth, and trans and non-binary parents. And it's that last thing that got us involved in the case as interveners. So the LGBT Family Coalition intervened. So we had a little role to play in that. And we finally got a judgment in January 2021, so last year, which was extremely positive for trans immigrants, for non-binary people, for intersex people, for trans youth. And I put that in red, trans youth, because the government has decided to go into appeal against the the thing that went forward for trans youth, the government is saying, no, we don't accept that. We're going to appeal that. The other things were not appealed. And also a positive judgment for trans and non-binary parents. So the judgment requires that the government amend its civil code before the end of it required, I should put that in the past, before the end of 2021. The government didn't make it, so they've asked for an extension to June 17th. So we should have a new law. I mean, we will. It's a legal obligation to have a new law before June 17th, 2022. So for families, and there's so much, I gave a talk recently at UQAM in their Département de Sciences Juridiques, and I spent over 3 hours just talking about this particular aspect of it. So there's a lot in there to unpack. I won't go into it at all, but non-binary for the families, quite simple and straightforward. We have non-binary parents who were saying the roles on birth certificates, mother or father, they don't work for people who are non-binary. They're too gendered, they're too in the binary. So the suggestion was that we give a third option to every person in Quebec. So when they're filling out the form for birth certificates for their kids, that they should have the choice between mother or father or parent. So that was granted. And the second thing was to fix the thing with the birth certificate that I showed you before, so that trans parents could have parental roles that match with their gender identity if they want that to be the case. So all sounds good. What the next thing that happened was that the government, in response to that, and also in response to the fact that we need, in Quebec, since many years, we've needed to amend our family law, because the last time family law was amended was in 1980. So it's over 40 years ago. And there's families are quite different now from how they were back then. So the Minister of Justice, Simon Jolin Barrette, decided to launch a single bill that would deal with both those questions. So the whole question related to the court case, that relates to the civil registry, and the reform of law, a family law, all together in one big law. So it's a huge, it's like 120 pages, many dispositions. It deals with things about the civil registry, so all the legal documents and all that for trans and non-binary people, family violence, designation of tutors, surrogacy, access to origins, at-home inseminations, legislative text. It's a humongous law. Too much for one law, according to me and according to many other people too. So two laws in one, the civil registry and the reform of family law, the portion that has to do with filiation. So the legal link that connects parents and kids. So for the filiation part, I won't talk to you about the other stuff because I'm running out of time, I think. Yeah, I'm getting there. So I'm almost at the end. I'll talk to you about the filiation part. And if you want in the questions, we could talk about the trans part. But for the filiation, some good things are in that law. Hopefully it will be adopted for at least for that part. So there's going to be a legal framework for surrogacy, something that we as an organization have submitted 4 briefs over in the past year. So we're really waiting for this. So it's pretty much unfolding exactly as we hoped it would. So basically what it's saying is when you want to start a family through surrogacy, the first step is that the individual or the couple and the surrogate meet up with psychosocial professionals, and so that they can kind of get informed about all the different issues around going into a surrogacy project. So the economic, the psychosocial, the health issues, all those things will be discussed so that people can give an informed consent, especially for the surrogate. That's important. The next step after they've been through that process is they'll sign a contract with a notary. And then it should go through pretty smoothly. The other positive thing is that now families that start through surrogacy will have the same 55 weeks of parental leave as all other families do. Currently, they only have about 32 weeks, something like that. So because it's not recognized surrogacy, so they will have the same amount of weeks, which is another thing that we've been asking for many years. So that's good. The bad part is that the government decided to say that when the child is born, surrogate gives birth, for the first 7 days, the parents, the intended parents, won't be the legal parents. They'll just be tutors. And then between days 8 and 30, it will be the surrogate that decides whether or not she wants to give consent that the parents be designated as legal parents. So in all other jurisdictions in Canada, it's really the reverse. It's basically the intended parents become legal parents right away. And if the surrogate wants to contest, then she has 30 days after the birth of the child to contest it. So it's kind of putting all the weight on the surrogate. We think it's a really bad situation. It's going to make people very, very, very nervous in a period where they should be really happy and bonding with their kid. It's going to make everybody a little bit nutso. So we went to the National Assembly and we talked about that. So hopefully that will be changed. We'll see. They're discussing it right now, this bill. The other thing that was a really bad news for us is that multi-parent families is something we've been asking for many years. They're completely ignored in this law. The Minister of Justice really specifically defined in his first press conference, he said, for us, a family is just 2 parents. Well, that's really resonated for me because I remember hearing in 2001, for us, a family is a mother and a father. So it's the same sort of stuff. And actually, multi-parent families are recognized elsewhere in Canada. In British Columbia, you can have up to 3 parents on a birth certificate. In Ontario, up to 4. In Saskatchewan, 4 parents as well. So it's not like it's impossible. It's already being done in other Canadian provinces. The other problem with this proposed legislation for trans parents is that the government decided to interpret the judgment of that court case I was talking to you about as being that we should give that choice of parent, the word parent, only to trans people and non-binary people. What we were saying is that that choice should be offered to everyone. Because if you only give it to trans and non-binary people, it's going to identify them. As soon as you'll see a birth certificate that says parent, you know it's a trans person. So you're forcibly outing them. So it's a kind of a separate but equal status that's very problematic. So we've asked for that to be changed as well. So where are we now? We participated in those parliamentary consultations. I was attacked by Simon Jolin Barrette. I hate him, but that's a whole other story. They're doing a detailed study of it now. We've asked to be consulted on the amendments to the law, but they're not going to. And we'll see what the law will contain around June the 17th. So that's it. Yeah, that's all. Are there any questions?
I can always run up to you, or you can come here. Yeah, we clapped. I almost feel like we should clap again. Mona, you have spent, you know, such a half your life, you know, fighting for these rights, and what an incredible success. And, you know, it's just overwhelming what you've accomplished and what, you know, the whole organization has accomplished. So again, thanks again for everything you've done. Really, and with such good humor, such passion, and it's really a phenomenal thing to see. And as much as I've known you, I've never seen it encapsulated like this. So really remarkable accomplishment. So thank you. Yeah.
Hi. I have a quick question, and it's because I'm curious about it. The laws that Canada have about LGBTQ2 plus parents and everything, does countries like United States or countries in the Europe, do they have the similar laws that help LGBTQ2 plus parents with like all the difficulties that they live through?
Well, first of all, just so you know, family law in Canada is province by province. So each province is different. That's why we're not the same as other provinces. And in certain ways, like for many years, Quebec was like a world leader. You know, in 2002, when we got that law, we were the most advanced place in the world. So, and you know, if we just would look at Ontario, they were way behind us for that sort of thing. So it varies within countries, and the same thing for the states also, it's state by state. So, and again, marriage in the States was, you know, like a whole country thing, but when we're talking about adoption laws or family rights, it's really state by state. So when you're looking at states like California or New York or Massachusetts, those are all very progressive states and the laws are very positive. There's really a huge equality, like here in Quebec, for the most part. And then other places like Kentucky or Florida or whatever, there's very, very different laws. Worldwide, it varies from country to country. Western Europe, many countries have pretty good laws in place. I mean, France just within the past few months had access to fertility clinics for lesbians and single women. They didn't before, so they're like literally 20 years behind us. Places like the Netherlands are very advanced. Some of the Scandinavian countries, Italy is not very advanced at all. Eastern Europe countries, European countries are less advanced. So it varies. It's from country to country, and it depends on so many things. And I think we're really advanced here in Canada because it's interesting because I've spoken in many different countries, and what I realize is that we have a Charter of Rights here that's really, it's a really powerful tool. Like there's many other countries have something that's similar to Charter of Rights, but it's almost more like symbolic and nobody ever uses it. It's just kind of there to say what we should do. But in Canada, our provincial and federal charters of rights and freedoms, they're like the most important laws of the land. And so we can challenge laws by using the charter protections that are in place. So that's so that's not because we're better advocates or it's because we have the charter.
Oh, there
Yeah.
was. Oh, hi.
Oh.
Okay.
So you talked about like all the legal actions that you accomplished and you went through for the last 25 years, and you mentioned of the project that you're going through currently with Parliament. Essentially, my question is, what is next for either you and or the organization for legal rights? Either if it's related to the missing context that you mentioned with Quebec, or if they are other issues.
Well, for sure, the fact that I don't know if I mentioned it or not, with the multi-parent families, we're about to start a court case. So we're going, again, using always that same strategy, legislation, courts, institutions. So we're definitely working on that. We have actually a big legal firm that's agreed to do it with us pro bono, so we won't have to pay them. And I have two really great families that are going to be the main plaintiffs in the case. We'll wait to see what comes up with this law in June around our families, but I'm thinking that part of the law will go in the right direction. But a lot of our work, like all this talk about legal stuff, it's not our everyday work, to be honest. We do, of course, work on that a lot, but our everyday work is not only the legal recognition of these families, it's the social recognition. So we're doing a lot around that, sensitizing people, like training professionals, because there's still quite a bit of bias out there. And so, we work with all different types of people that work with our families. That's an important work for us. There needs to be a lot of work around transparenting. We're just working with a CLSC in the CLSC Bordeaux-Cartierville, which I think is around here, but maybe I'm wrong. I've never been to it. It is around here, right? They're going to be opening up services for pregnant, trans, and non-binary people, because they, when trans and non-binary people get pregnant, they experience so much stigmatization, and just like they're not well treated in the birthing setting, whether it's in a hospital or maison de naissance, whatever. So we're actually working with them to put that type of service in place. There's a lot of different projects that we have, but for families, if you would have asked me in 2002, what's the next step? I literally went like this in 2002. Okay, done. Now I won't have to do this stuff anymore. And there's always new things that seem to come up. So we're working also a lot on projects with BIPOC families now, so Black, Indigenous, people of color, also families that are just living outside of Montreal, because those are families that are often really isolated. So it's a lot of the social side, and the legal side, well, for now, it's definitely multi-parent families. And then after that, we'll see. On the personal level, I think I'm probably going to retire pretty soon and do something else. So, but yeah, for the group, I'm sure that there's always going to be things to do. It's also like part of the group is just creating community for LGBT families. Just, giving a space where people can socialize together. We have our Cabana Suit coming up, and we'll have 250 people that will come with their kids. And it's just the LGBT community, like any other community, we like to be together sometimes. I think there was someone with a hoodie. Yeah.
Yes, so
Oh, okay.
I had a question basically about like lower education. How does this affect your children, for example? And do you, like, I see you're in Vanier, but do you go to lower education to basically teach like the younger people of our generation? Because I know there are a lot of stigmas, and there's a lot of people that aren't really educated on this topic.
Yeah, that's a good question. My group, and we actually share offices with another organization that's called Greenbaum, and they're a group that goes into schools and does all sorts of workshops and stuff with kids, even at the primary school level and high school kids. And it's so important. It's basically they go in and they give testimonies, like they'll talk about their own experience. It's usually like a duo, two people that of different genders that will talk about what they've experienced, and they're coming out and all that, and then the students can ask them questions. Our group does another thing. We work with the professionals. So I don't do them so much nowadays, but I used to do them all the time. But we have 12 trainers on our team that are amazing, and they go all over the province, and they train teachers and school administrators and nurses and all sorts of people about many different types of workshops too, but all around sexual and gender diversity. So it's kind of like what we do, and what GRI does is very, very complementary. Our kids definitely, and now they have a new sex education program in schools, so they're supposed to be touching upon that also, but. Yep.
My question is, back then you said you were fighting for your rights, and you were denied some rights. How were your kids affected by this? Like, especially at school, like, were they treated different, or like, did they have friends, or like were friends looking at them weird because they had two parents who had the same gender?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, I would say that up until they were in elementary school, because we have so many gay and lesbian friends with kids, I remember my older one coming home and saying, "You're not going to believe what I saw today. There's a kid that has a mother and a father, like one of each," because they were so used to seeing families with two moms or two dads. So that was their reality for a while. And then when they started elementary school, that's when they started to learn that they were, in the minority and that they were different. And I have to say, like, my older one was a bit teased about it. They were never bullied, and they always had friends. But they were a bit teased for sure, and other kids have been also. But I think that in general, like, our kids are especially nowadays, like we're talking quite a while back, but our kids do okay in the schools for sure. There's a lot of questions, and sometimes there's some bad remarks, but I think that our society has evolved a bit. And so generally they do okay. And I know for my kids, my younger one never got teased at all. And all the friends knew that they had two moms. I have to say, when they began high school, however, they started in a new school and they really went underground for a while, like that age 12, 13, when everybody wants to be conforming and exactly the same. They were, they said, "We're not going to talk about you." And they weren't inviting friends over for about a year. And then all of a sudden, they reach that age where it's cool to be different. So then all of a sudden it's like our house becomes general headquarters, which it has been since. So I think in general in Quebec, we're lucky here because the experience is pretty positive. I mean, there's been different experiences, but in general, our kids are not so bad, not so badly off.
No.
So one of the online attendees is asking, what would you say was your biggest challenge or challenges since the beginning of your fight with the coalition?
Definitely the fight for rights in 2002, because in that particular fight, I felt personally attacked. You know, now it's become kind of like a tennis match. Like I couldn't go and, you know, we've worked a lot on trans, right? I haven't, you know, we've had other things we were involved with over the years. And I can do it in a very kind of, not detached, because I still feel strongly about these issues, but it doesn't touch me personally as a person. Whereas when we were fighting for family rights for our own families, I felt like we were personally being attacked. So it was emotional, you know, like you wouldn't feel it. And then all of a sudden you feel super angry. And it's connected to that. So yeah, that was a tough time for sure. And I have to say that recently working with the current Minister of Justice, Simon Jolin Barrette, I don't know if you guys are political at all, but if you are, you must know a bit about him. Awful, very, very unpleasant experience, but not so personal, just not fun. Yeah. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation.
Very welcome.
I have two questions. I'm going to start with the one that's piqued my interest, though, based on your last comment. You've mentioned the Minister Barrette a number of times, and I can't help but ask, what have you found so difficult in your dealings with him?
Are there any journalists in the room? I don't want to be quoted on this. You know, we're supposedly a nonpartisan group, but he's a bigot. He's basically a bigot. It's a very conservative government that we have now. We've seen it for policies regarding people who wear hijab. We've seen it for all sorts of language-related policies. And for our community, he's a very arrogant man. He thinks he knows better than anyone else. He doesn't, the government in general doesn't work by consulting. They do things very rapidly. In French, we say broche à foin. It's like half-ass way of doing things. They put together laws really quickly. They push them through quickly without any consensus. Their laws are full of errors and problems and are non-functional. The law that I mentioned on the assisted procreation that supposedly gives us certain coverage of fees for assisted procreation. It was adopted in March 2021, came into effect in November 2021, and we still don't have access to that coverage because there's so many errors in the law. He's just really arrogant. I was attacked when I went there. He was attacking me about multi-parent families, about surrogacy. You know, I've done many, many public consultations in my life. It's usually a very positive experience because you're there to be consulted. So they're asking questions and it's exchange, it's pleasant. But in this case, I felt like I was being cross-examined and it was like he was trying to nail me. And he's just a very arrogant man and he thinks he knows everything. He made a ton of mistakes for the trans and non-binary communities. The judgment that we got from Judge Moore that was super positive was completely misinterpreted. He didn't deign to consult the trans community at all and just put a law in, it's not a law yet, it's a slated legislation in place that's so harmful for trans people. Of course, I mean, there's been, if you follow the newspapers at all, in the past month, there's been literally hundreds of articles on how prejudicial that proposition was, those different propositions. The effect of those propositions is that trans rights will go actually backwards in Quebec by many years. So he's just awful. He's an awful person.
All right, thank you. I don't usually allow myself those types of questions. But
I don't usually answer those with a microphone in front of my face, although I own it, you know, I'm okay with it.
I understand.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for being so forthright.
Okay.
My second comment, many years ago, I was at a presentation and the woman that was presenting was explaining how she'd been very busy in terms of fighting for LGBTQ rights in the States, and
Okay.
notably recognition of marriage. And she explained when her group started out, they started out from a platform of rights. Okay, so it was their right to have marriage. And what happened is as she put it, the blowback from the community was very strong. And when she was analyzing it for us in the presentation, she said, what we did by asking for rights is the general population felt threatened, and we ended up with a polarization, right? And when you showed your initial picture at the beginning about parents, gay parents, etc., you had pour et contre, which was covered in the newspaper, which is very polarizing as well. What she explained is when they went up to bat the second time in their next wave of fighting for their rights, is rather than have a discussion about rights, they turned it into love is love, right? So love is love, regardless of gender, regardless of sexual orientation, love is love. And she said that move equaled the playing ground because it was finding similarity with the people hearing it and the people that were trying to get the rights that they needed to be able to live full lives. So when you were going around giving your presentations, having interviews, etc., when you were told, it was smart actually on the part of the government to say, not many Quebecers are really into this. Can you go out and tell people? It was actually a good idea on their part. And I'm just wondering, did you find a way to find common ground with the Quebec public in a way? What did you do? Because you shifted things. I'm just wondering how that happened. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. It's a good question. I think I remember thinking to myself at that time, I'm spending all this time talking about that our kids eat broccoli and do their homework. So it was basically to show people that, yes, our families look a bit different, but at the end of the day, they're like all other families, and we love our kids. And I think a lot of it was also pointing out that we're not talking about giving rights to gays and lesbians to start their families. We already have our families. So what we really underlined was the fact that our kids were being discriminated against and that they didn't have the same protections of having two legal parents as other children did. And so it was a lot of just normalizing, and we spent a load of time saying, we're the same, we're the same, we're the same. 20 years later, I have to say that I think we're not exactly the same. I think there are differences between our families, and difference is good, difference. But at that time, the slogan was, our families are exactly the same as yours. And so that's, I think, how people connected. And when you talk about, I think the strategy, love is love that they had in the States was the same sort of thing here. And, when I showed you that slide with the 3 young adults that were talking about their families, that was like a very love is love moment. And that's really what worked. These politicians, you can go and talk to them about research and policy, but really my experience with politicians, and I've done many consultations and presented many briefs, is that you have to talk from the heart, and that's the thing they connect to.
If there are no questions, I'd like to ask one. If there are no questions by students, are there any students who have questions? How are we doing for time, Colleen?
Good, yeah, 5 minutes.
Okay. So I wanted to say, that when I was listening to you and the whole pour contre, I'm not as lovely as you. It was really boiling my blood a little bit.
It boiled
right?
my blood too at the time.
And so this is what I wanted to ask you about, because I've been involved in various activism over the last few years, and one of the things that's so enraging is to be in that position to say, you have to recognize my humanity. You have the power to deny my humanity or to recognize it. And I just want to say, who are you to say if my family can or can't exist, or should or shouldn't exist, or should be recognized? I mean, why is it that I have to prove to you that I'm like you, or that I'm as good as you? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
And so I wonder how you, just because, you were, as you said, directly affected by the laws or the lack of laws. And I wonder how you navigated that over such a long period, because it's been a really long struggle. So it's not like 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, let's say 10. You've been doing this for 3 decades now.
You know what the worst part was, and I didn't talk to you guys about that, but for our own court case, when we were trying to get parental rights for my partner, Nicole, the judge said that youth protection had to study us. That was one of the things that the judge ordered. And I found that, it's not that, we went through a psychosocial evaluation. I found that the process itself was okay, but the idea that they were doing a psychosocial evaluation of, at that time, our kids, I think, were 3 and 4 years old. I found that very denigrating, the idea of it, you know. And funnily, at the end, the social worker in the report, she said, oh yeah, this family's okay because Nicole's the father, which was like really ridiculous also. And I don't know why she determined that, but it's true that Nicole does take out the garbage. So maybe it's that. So yeah. I don't know. There's times when I've been thinking that I have a little bit of built up anger, and it's like that I'm not aware of, but it comes out at funny times. So yeah, it's there. I think it's there for a lot of activists. Yeah, I try to like rationally, like I mentioned, think about it like a tennis game. That's like my psychological game that I play, because you can get very emotionally involved. Yeah. Okay.
I'm tempted to ask a question. You know, this whole career has been such a passion project for you, Mona, and for so many, you know, in your entourage. And I'm wondering, and I'm looking at a sea of brilliant, you know, inspired young people who are going into all kinds of different domains in life. And I'm wondering, what would you, to some extent, pinpoint as some of the studies or disciplines that you find your career touches upon? I mean, I can, you know, there's legal, there's social, there's psychological, there's so many layers to which you have become an expert on. And yet for anyone who is looking to be a part of, you know, or will be an activist in their lifetime, what do you feel are some of the key attributes in learnings or teachings that they would benefit from?
You know what? I'm tempted to say, you know, my background is not in any of those things that you mentioned. I have a master's in biochemistry. I couldn't be further away. Hoped for my kids have both done university. I hope that whatever they study, that they studied something and took it seriously, because it's incredible how much an education can have. Because I work with a lot of really smart people, but that haven't had the, you know, the college or the university education. And you do see a difference. I think it's just whatever you study, it can be very, very helpful. For sure, in the field that I'm in, you know, if I was back being 20 again, I don't know, maybe social work, maybe law, maybe therapy. There's so many different things. I mean, everything is interesting if you get into it. I don't have a good answer for that. Choose something that you like.
Looks like it's time. Yeah, thank you so much, Mona. What
Thanks.
a real
Thanks to
treat
you
having
also.
you.